Go. Okay, and we are live. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining today. My name is Troy Delaney. I'm a certified coach. I run the websites troydelaney.com and antifragile.fit, and I'm a host of several health and longevity groups. Today we have Dr. James Kelley, the medical science liaison for L-Nutra, the maker of Dr. Longo's ProLon fasting mimicking diet. Thanks for joining us today, Dr. Kelley. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's great to talk to you again, Troy.
Same here. Can you start with just giving us a little bit of background information and how you got involved in fasting?
Sure. Yeah. So, as Troy mentioned, I'm a clinician by training. I'm an MD, MBA. I did an externship in sports medicine and then my MBA in early stage medical innovation. And I had did my MBA at the University of Southern California, which is where Dr. Valter Longo, the founder of the L-Nutra company and also the ProLon 5-day fasting mimicking diet, has done most of his research in the field of longevity. So I got to know Dr. Longo while I was there, and I had known a little bit about fasting, but my primary interest was essentially, so sports medicine as a practice sounds like sports, but it's really about how the body moves and how we preserve function moving throughout our lives. So we do quite a bit of training with people as we age. So I had a big focus on longevity as part of my training, but I really hadn't paid much attention to how nutrition plays a role, and particularly how fasting may impact that. But I got to learn about that while I was doing my MBA portion of my training. And then I went on to do a couple other startups and work for the Cleveland Clinic Innovations Group in a partnership with some West Coast hospital systems out here. And fast forward several years, I got a call in late 2015 from Dr. Joseph Antune, the CEO of L-Nutra, asking if I wanted to join the team as we were ready to launch. And that's when I really learned a lot more about ProLon. So for those of you who may or may not be aware of what we're talking about, the ProLon 5-day fasting mimicking diet is a meal program that's designed to put your cells in a similar state to if you were in a continuous fast for 5 days. And there are some benefits that I'm sure we'll talk about today about why you would want to be in 5 days of consecutive fasting as opposed to just 12 to 16 hours like a time restricted eating or more typical intermittent fasting. So I don't know if that's a good intro, but
that's perfect. Yeah, actually, that leads me into my next question is, can you define the difference between intermittent fasting, time restricted eating / feeding, and then an extended fast?
Yeah, so that's one of the key questions is why 5 days and why fasting in general, but why 5 days? So the idea that fasting is beneficial comes out of the idea that we kind of evolved this way. Food used to be pretty scarce. The only way we made it this far was being able to survive gaps in resources. So when we ran out of food, we didn't know whether it was going to be for a day or a week. And those of us that adapted better to the longer fasting were able to survive and pass on our DNA. So there's a lot of evolutionary pressure to get good at fasting. So that's probably why it's beneficial. There are some differences between durations. We don't want the body to panic every time it goes a couple hours without eating. So turning on all of the prolonged fasting cleanup mechanisms, and there are several of them, but the main one we look at is what happens inside your cells. It takes about 24 hours to really convince your body that you're in the true fasting state. In the 12 to 16 hour fasting, which is time restricted eating, which is one form of intermittent fasting, you're going to get a lot of benefits. There are things like metabolic flexibility, which means your cells are better at using different energy sources, so they can switch between sugar and other types of energy more easily. You're going to get it more keto adapted, as they say. You can get in and out of ketosis a little quicker. You may sustain some more weight loss, especially if you fast for a longer period of time. You may have a more additional weight loss. And it's going to help you if you recently did lose weight, but you're not going to get the deep cellular clean unless you go longer than about 24 hours to even start that process. And it's a thing called autophagy or autophagy. And there's no evidence in humans that it starts before 24 hours. Arguably, it may take a little bit longer than that even. The team that figured out how it works, Dr. Osumi and his team in Japan, actually just figured this out last decade, and they won the Nobel Prize the same decade. So a pretty recent understanding of how it works in humans, but it takes a couple hours to days to even start the process. And then it takes a couple more days to get that cleanup. So you want to be in that fasting state for several days, which is one of the reasons we exist, because that's really hard. And we can talk about that too. So when you eat a meal, you have about 12 hours of sugar in your bloodstream from that last meal. And as that goes down, insulin goes down and glucagon goes up. Those are the hormones that tell your body where your blood sugar is coming from. And as the insulin goes down, glucagon goes up. That starts the signals to make other energy. And depending on where you are in that curve, that's one of the other differences. You can see differences in time for how quickly people get into a fast.
And now, how you're talking about reducing glucose in the blood? How is that different than like a keto diet where you're relying on ketones for
Yeah.
energy?
So the thing that, and this is all, it gets really complicated really quickly. So I'll do my best, but the body gets energy from a lot of different sources. And it's really, really important to differentiate between the idea that you are in a starvation state and you're in a ketogenic state. Those are different. Ketones are what your body will make when you're in a starvation state, but you can eat ketones too. So if you're eating 3,000 or 4,000 calories of ketones, you're going to be in ketosis, but your cells are not going to be in that cellular cleanup state from fasting because there's far too much nutrition. So protein in particular is what actually drives your cells to go into a fasting state. There are a lot of things that play a role in it, and true water fasting is both low carbs and low protein, but cells don't need to have zero carbs to get into a fasting state. Cells just need a certain amount of carbs and very low protein. So the signaling we look at is a thing called IGF-1 or insulin-like growth factor 1. And I'm going to spare everybody the biochem, but short version is this is one of the main drivers of how we grow and potentially how we age as well. So if you look at IGF-1 signaling, it's primarily driven by amino acids and protein. So if you eat less protein, you get lower IGF-1. And if you restrict all the way down, you stop that IGF-1 signaling to the level that the cells think they have food. It's like, it's a nutrient sensor. It's the way your body tells what you ate. When it knows not just how much you ate, it also knows what you ate. And if you eat a bunch of protein, it tells the body, I've got materials to make stuff. So it'll grow everything. About 2/3 of every gram of protein you eat doesn't get turned into muscle. It gets turned into other stored energy. So protein is a scaffold. It can be used for a lot of stuff. So when you eat a lot of it, you ramp up growth. And if you want to put the cells into a fasting state, you got to take away the protein. So carbs are an energy source. They can also be, the body is super complex, but I think of it as the carbs are the gas, the protein is the car. So you need both to get somewhere. So if you turn off if you take away the gas, the car just switches to like solar power or something. So it switches over to ketones. But if you take away the protein, you have no car. So I know that may not be a great example, so I apologize. But
No, that makes sense. That makes now. Does it matter whether it's animal protein or plant-based protein?
yeah. So animal protein has the most complete amino acids. There are a couple amino acids that can't be made by the body that are called essential amino acids, and you can get them from various sources, but animals have the strongest amount, and I believe the main ones are leucine and valine are the two that really ramp growth. I think there's other ones as well, but animals have them in a greater abundance. So if you eat more animal protein, you're getting a much more dense amino acid package in the same amount of protein. So you're going to trigger growth much more strongly. So you can get away with a lot more plant-based protein than you can with animal protein before you get the same impact on how you grow and age. So that's one of the reasons why in our meal program we're all plant-based, and the protein is all plant sources. And even in that case, you still have to be pretty low with the protein if you want to smuggle it in under the radar and give your body some energy and building blocks while still not triggering your cells to get out of that cleanup state. So that's really, for those of you at home who are wondering how we mimic fasting, that's the concept right there. The alarms that tell your body that food is there, when you take away all the food, they stop sounding the alarms and the cells go into this cleanup mode. There's a little bit of a wiggle room you can sneak in under the alarm. And that's what we figured out. We figured out exactly how much and what type and how you put it together of food can I smuggle into the body and keep your cells in that cleanup state. That's really kind of the magic of fasting mimicking diets. The cleanup part is all driven by your own body. So if you're able to do a water fast and you aren't losing too much muscle and you aren't having too many side effects of it, and it's safe for you, and you're especially if you're going a long couple of days and you're being seen by your clinician, that may work for you. For others, though, this is an achievable way to do it in a much more viable manner and hopefully safer for most people.
So is that what Dr. Longo was looking at? Was water only fasting may be more beneficial, but how do we increase the compliance and also muscle loss and I guess safety? Is that more?
Yeah, so there are a couple things that happen with water fasting, and there may be some benefits to it. We're trying to get many of the same benefits. So I'm not going to say we're equivalent because nobody's really done a head-to-head trial of the two. We know that we get many of the same benefits. The biggest challenge with water fasting is that 90 to 95% of people are going to drop out by day 2. which means they're just barely getting into that cellular cleanup state, that autophagy. So they need to be in it for longer to get the full benefit, but if they can't stick with it, it's pointless. The next challenge is that there are some safety issues. If you're not eating any fat, your gallbladder secretes bile. When you eat fat, your bile coats the fat and helps you absorb it. If you're not eating any fat, you're not releasing that bile, and the bile sits there and you can get gallstones. So that's one risk. But more importantly, you get about a third of the water you get each day from your food. So the physical food you eat is mostly water. So if you take away that physical food, even if you're drinking water, you're still at a third deficit. You're getting a third less water. You're also not getting any of the electrolytes that help you hold on to the water. And most Americans eat a lot of electrolytes. We eat a lot of salt. So if you take away all that salt, you're just going to diurese. You're going to let go of all the water you're storing. So low blood pressure, low hydration, dehydration are very common with prolonged fasting. And even on our diet, we want to make sure people get adequate hydration so that they can stay well hydrated, keep their blood volume normal, because your blood is made a lot of your blood is water. So that's one risk of water only fasting. Even though you're drinking water, you got to drink way more. And how much that is depends on who you are. There are some other challenges. Early on in a fast, before you get into full ketosis, your body's actually going to eat mostly muscle and liver stored energy. So glycerin, glycogen, and amino acids stored in your liver and your muscles are going to provide the bulk of your energy while you're waiting for ketones to ramp up. So you can actually lose some muscle mass. You can also be very lightheaded, you're low on energy, you're et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of challenges with water fasting. So what we tried to do was remove a lot of those challenges, make it much easier to get through. About 95% of people get through our 5 days just fine. Help preserve lean body mass, which is bone and muscle versus everything else, and provide energy and nourishment and some of the electrolytes you need to hold on to that water while you're getting through the 5 days. So we're trying to be the compromise between the challenge, and you got to go maybe a little bit longer with our diet than you would with the water fast. You might be able to get there in about 4 days, maybe a little bit longer. Nobody's done the studies. And autophagy, for those who are not familiar with autophagy or autophagy, is Greek for self-eating. Auto is self, phagy is eating, and it's the process that your cells will eat your old and worn out stuff inside your cells that you accumulate throughout your life. And it's really hard to measure because it happens inside your cells. And the act of looking at it pauses it and destroys it. So it's hard, even then it's hard to measure. So they have to do a biopsy of you and stain it a certain way, or they look for a certain thing that shows up in your bloodstream from white blood cells going through autophagy. It's just really, really hard to measure. So figuring out how much autophagy you need and how often and all that stuff is a very, very dense question. And we're just starting to unravel that. But we know that you get a lot of benefits from a couple of days in a row. And that's really where we're starting. We've done a ton of clinical research on it. We've got about $50 million of federally funded research and grant funded research on the preclinical and clinical studies around this. We're doing dozens more trials all the time. So there's a lot of info that we're going to learn, but we're still I think we're as advanced as you get, and we're still kind of scratching the surface.
Okay. So even though you are eating, you still are, autophagy is still happening. That's still occurring in the body.
Mm-hmm.
And so you were saying, how do you actually measure that in the clinical trials that for the ProLon?
So there's a couple ways, and one of them is, so we got to be a little bit careful, and I apologize. I'll do my best to answer the questions in as much of a transparent and compliant way as I can. But there's some things we looked at in the trials that are not claims we make about the diet. So we did MRIs and we measured stem cells and things like that. So there's a lot of things you can do that can give a proxy, but the most direct way you can look at it is what's called LC3-2, which is a thing that occurs. It's called an autophagy-based end product. It's something that shows up in the bloodstream a couple days into a fast when you're measuring white blood cells. So, but it's only looking at what's happening in white blood cells because they're in the bloodstream. You can't really see what's happening in the liver unless you do a biopsy. There are people who are doing fat biopsies in trials going on right now, and I'm anxious to see what their results are. So we may know more in a little bit, but yeah, right now the easiest way to do it is LC3-2, and it's not an outpatient lab you can do. So there's no real home test for autophagy yet. So we're working on that actively. A lot of people are. We're looking at other ways to measure this. We did do in certain studies, we looked at other markers for aging, but we're going to wait until they get certified as actual markers you can use. So.
Okay, makes sense. Now, if somebody is doing the ProLon fast and they're measuring their glucose levels, are there certain levels that they should be looking for to make sure that they're in a safe limit, or would glucose not be really a problem when you're doing ProLon?
And that's a great question. There is if anybody has a history of hypoglycemia or low blood sugar, we don't want you doing ProLon unless your clinician is observing you and they think it's a good idea. We want to make sure we take safety first. So that's the first answer would be, if you have known hypoglycemia or even suspected, you want to be very careful with any prolonged fast. We don't want people to get into trouble. If you're in really high ketosis, does it matter if your blood sugar is below 70, say, which is usually the most comfortable blood sugar, seem to be between 70 and 100? And the answer is we don't know. So there are reports of people having overnight blood sugars they weren't expecting when they wear continuous glucose monitors during prolonged fasting. And they have no side effects from that, but they're lower than they would have expected. So we're learning a lot about what actually happens during fasting and whether blood sugar, whether it changes. We don't know. We would still like people to stay within the healthy range, which is usually 60 to 100. Most people feel good over 70. So if you are lower and you're experiencing side effects, we encourage you to be safe first and foremost. So whenever you're attempting a prolonged fast, but what that safety limit is during fasting is as much as it's kind of the oldest science, is probably the reason we're here, is reproduction and fasting are the two main drivers as far as I can tell. It's in terms of what we actually know clinically about it, it's relatively new. So there are some people that have been doing it for decades, and obviously certain religions have been doing it for all time. But yeah, so I apologize for giving vagaries. I'm doing my best to make sure that I keep my own personal biases out of this.
Sure, no, absolutely. And now, how does can we? I guess let's talk a little bit more about the actual fasting mimicking diet. How does that differ from detoxing or juice cleanses?
Yeah. So the way we do it matters. So the diet, for if you haven't seen it, if anybody at home has not seen it, it's 5 days of breakfast, lunch, dinner, soup, snacks, drinks, desserts. It's plant-based. You get a breakfast bar in the mornings, and then you have a soup and a crackers for lunch on some days, soup and olives on other days, and then olives or more crackers for snacks, and then for dinner you have another soup, and there's a choco crisp dessert thing. So and herbal teas, as well as this special drink we give you on day 2 through 5 called the L drink, to help give you more energy. And we can probably talk about that in a bit. But so that's the form factor of what it is, just so you have an idea in your mind. This is, some people call it like space food, but it's real plant-based food, just very carefully scientifically designed. And that's the real key there. There's a chance that certain juice cleanses may get you into autophagy and may even keep you there. But it very, very much depends on what's in them. And I can guarantee they're not going to give you the same level of energy if they're keeping you in that fasting state. Like, for example, the Master Cleanse has a ton of maple syrup in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it has way too much maple syrup, and it's just completely exposed to the body. So we have about 15 grams of sugar per day in the diet, which is actually quite a bit. But about 8 grams of it is delivered in this nut bar in the morning, and it tastes very sweet. But it has a very low glycemic index, meaning the amount of sugar your body actually sees is not that high. If I gave you 8 grams of honey just sitting on a tablespoon in a thimble or a shot glass and you drank it, it would kick you out of a fast. But if I emulsify it, if I blend it out into a high amount of plant-based fiber, we use a lot of chicory root, which is inulin in our diet, and a lot of nut-based oils. There's macadamia and coconut in the bar. Those are going to slow the absorption, and they're going to hide a lot of that sugar from the body, so it's not going to spike your insulin. So you get a very flat delivery of the sugar, doesn't spike your insulin, helps keep you in a fasting state. Whereas if I did it like the Master Cleanse and you're just drinking maple syrup in a juice, it's too much direct exposure. So the way we put together the food, even though it is just natural plant-based food, is very technical. So the nut bar is very carefully designed and very carefully tested to show that it does that. There's a couple other things we do in the diet to deliver more energy to help maintain lean body mass. So there are other things out there that may get you some of the cleanup, but with additional risk. So we're trying to balance it out so that we keep people safe. We give them as easy of an experience as we possibly can. It's still 800 to 1130 calories. So there are people who are going to be hungry on the diet. There are going to be some people who struggle on day 2 or 3 as they transition into that fasting state. That's just your own body. There's nothing wrong with the diet necessarily. That's just how you're responding to it. But you got to power through it for some people, especially the first time they do it. But we still try to make it as easy as possible. And if they were eating nothing, it'd be much, much harder for the vast majority of people to stick with it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I've done, before I did ProLon, I was doing 5-day water only fasts. And when I started doing ProLon, it's not only the food, it's just the when you get to a mealtime and you're just drinking water, it's the expectation that you're going to eat something and you don't. And with ProLon, you actually get to eat something. So you actually have something to look forward to, when lunch rolls around or when dinner rolls around. So I've noticed that is a big difference just mentally. It's a lot easier to get through a 5-day fast doing that. Can you talk a little bit more about that L drink? Because you said it helps with energy, but
Yeah.
I believe it also helps with muscle preservation. Is that right?
Yeah, then that's part of why it does that, is because it gives you energy. So the L drink is one of the cooler things. So, and I apologize for going into the biochem, but this is, I think, one of the coolest things about the way the diet works. So your body has evolved over the millennia to use energy in a very particular way called the Krebs cycle. You may have remembered that from high school chemistry or biology, wherever we learned the Krebs cycle. But it's how your body makes energy. And when you go into fasting, it does it a different way, and it makes ketones into energy instead of sugar. Sugar is the easiest one for it to do in a fed state. But when you go into a fasting state, you make energy a different way. So what the L drink is, and this is one of the most common questions we get, is why is everybody eating the same box of food if they're all different sizes? And there's two answers. One is your metabolism doesn't always care what body size you are. You probably have heard of people who are very, very large who have been dieting for a while and can't lose weight, even if they're eating a small amount of calories. And that's because their metabolism is the reason, not their body size. So if I just gave a box of food based on body size, it wouldn't always work the way we intended to. But larger people have more muscle, and we want to preserve more muscle, but not more fat. So what the L drink is glycerin suspended in water. And the cool thing about glycerin, and there's a couple other things in it too, but the way glycerin works is when you're not in a fasting state, if you drink glycerin, you just urinate it out. Your kidneys will filter it out. You can't use it for energy. But when you're in a fasting state, you can. And it's called a sugar alcohol, which some people have. Sugar alcohols are really interesting. It's not a true sugar. It's definitely not an alcohol. You can't absorb it normally. So they use it as a diet sweetener because it tastes fairly sweet. But when you're in a fasting state, if you eat it, your body will not spike your insulin the way sugar will, because it's not a true sugar. So it's a little bit of a stealthy way to smuggle energy into the body. So what we do is we dose it by body weight, because larger people have more muscle, and you dissolve it into the water bottle and fill that with water and drink that throughout the day for energy. Your body will normally pull energy in a fasting state from your ketones and your fat, but also glycerin in the liver and glycogen and amino acids. Your muscles are made out of glycogen and amino acids. If I give you more glycerin, you'll eat less glycogen and amino acids. So one of the ways that we help preserve lean body mass on our diet is by giving you that L drink. And so it acts as basically an energy drink because it's got sugar of sorts, like fasting sugar in it. And that also keeps you from pulling the energy from your muscles, especially early in the diet. We don't give it to you on day one because you're not yet in a fasting state, so you can't absorb it. But we give it to you on day 2 and throughout the diet to help preserve lean body mass and give you energy. So it's a really pretty, even though it's just the way we were designed, but it's a really clever hack for giving you energy in a fasting state. It's worthless when you're not in a fasting state. You cannot absorb it, can't use it for energy. But when you're in a fasting state, it will give you that extra kick. And everybody drinks some amount of it. And as you get larger, you get more of it.
That's right. Okay. Now, I was looking at some of the studies that that was performed using the kits, the ProLon FMD, and I noticed that it looks like visceral fat was the main fat that was lost, and that's the fat around the waist. Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah. So this is one of the cooler things too. So, and again, I apologize. I hope your audience likes nerds because I really feel like we're diving pretty deep into this. But so the cool thing about, I'll give you the simple version and then the more complex version as I see it. So the body seems to lose weight in a targeted way during fasting. Almost all of the weight comes from your midsection, your visceral fat. In our clinical trials, we did people did 3 cycles over 3 months. These are generally healthy people, a little bit overweight, BMI of 27. So kind of like your typical American. And they did just 5 days of ProLon each month for 3 months. That was the only thing they changed. Those 15 days were the total. And they lost about 5.7 pounds over those 15 days and about 1.6 inches off their waist. And almost all of it came from visceral fat. The fat that surrounds your organs is generally thought of as the bad, unhealthy type of fat. So most chronically reduced diets, so if you just restrict your diet by about 500 calories a day, like a lot of people do, and you just do that for months on end, you're going to lose weight. And eventually you'll plateau. But if you look at what weight you lost, about half of it's going to be fat and the other half is actually going to be muscle. So on our diet, it seems to be almost all fat and almost all from the midsection. So it's an interesting thing because Restrictive diets don't do that. Something about the mechanism of doing 5 days triggers some alarm bell in your body. It burns the emergency fuel, and that's all the visceral fat. And it goes away really quickly. The downside is when you finish the diet the first time, some of that may return fairly quickly because your body is built to store. You actually have to train it over successive cycles. That's why we did 3 cycles. You have to train it to leave some of that weight off. So don't get discouraged if you do 5 days, you lose a bunch of weight, and then you gain about half of it back over the next month to 2 months. That's pretty typical. That's just how we're built. You have to train the metabolism. You have to train the body. So even though we're ramping up the metabolism for those 5 days, we're not doing it the same way you would with a restrictive diet. So even though it is very restrictive for those 5 days, the next 25 days, you're going back to normal, which is one of the things I love about it. You're only doing it for 5 days. It's having a massive impact. And then, yes, it will trickle back. And then you do it again, you'll regain less. And the third time is when you really stick. We measured people about 4 months after their last box in that trial, and they still had about 2/3 of the weight loss, which I don't know of any other intervention you can do in medicine where if you stop doing it, 4 months later, you still have 65-ish% of the benefits. That's pretty unheard of. So, and we saw that across the board, about 55 to 71%, I think, of all the benefits were still maintained 4 months later without any other changes. And obviously, if you do make other changes, you're probably going to do better than that. So these are people who went right back to their normal lives, same exercise, same diet in between and after cycles. So if you, in the real world, actually make changes, you're probably going to do a little better. So I think of this as kind of a kickstart into a healthier lifestyle.
Yes, so there's more than just a physical change. There's also it seems a mental change, and just like a relationship with food after going through it.
Yeah, that's why I do it. So I do it for those, and I keep saying for those of you at home, I'm sorry if that's overused phrase, but so I'm from Ohio, and I was raised on red meat and Cheetos, and my parents did a great job. Don't clown on them, but that was something I really got into, and I still crave those. But when I'm done with the diet, for about 6 weeks afterwards, I don't. My cravings are totally reset. I also notice my brain fog goes away and I have higher energy levels. Those are very commonly reported things. We did a survey of thousands of our customers after just 1 cycle. And what we saw was that they all report almost across the board, it's much easier to make healthy choices. They have increased energy and mental clarity. They have a better relationship to food. They notice they don't need as big portions, so they have better portion control. They have specifically less sugar cravings. So there's a lot of changes mentally and emotionally. So it's almost a get out of jail free card from Thanksgiving and Christmas. So a lot of people will use it for a post-holiday or a pre-vacation cleanup, and it works well for that. But I think it really works best if you do 3 initial cycles spread out over 3 months, and then probably once a quarter as sort of the maintenance. And that'll just kind of keep you where you want to be for most people. Some people are going to need a little bit more. Some people may not need those initial 3 cycles. But if you're just looking for the behavioral benefits, you're going to get those even after just 1 cycle. So for the vast majority of people, and if you don't get them, I want to hear about it. So reach out to our team and let me know.
Now, was there another study recently that came out doing 4 cycles was equivalent to doing a Mediterranean diet?
So that one, that's currently unpublished. What they looked at was we looked at 4 cycles so the first study I talked about, the 3 cycles, is ProLon versus everyday life. This other trial, and again, we don't talk about it yet because it's not fully published, so I'll be a little bit vague on the results here, but the 4 cycles versus everyday heart healthy diet. So what if you did exactly what you're supposed to do for 120 straight days with health coaching and with a carefully designed diet program of this is what you're supposed to eat? How do you do versus if you just did 5 days of ProLon each month for 4 months? And it turns out you get many of the same benefits. So the 20 days of ProLon was in many ways equivalent to 4 months of an everyday heart healthy diet. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do good stuff in between, but what we learned was even if you don't do good stuff in between, you're still going to get almost, they had similar weight loss, but vastly superior profile. Most of our weight loss came from visceral fat, whereas the other diet, it came from half visceral, half lean body mass, and you don't want to lose that. So actually it was a much better body composition in the ProLon arm. We also had similar impact on some cardiometabolic markers, and similar impact on some hormones that regulate hunger and craving. So there's a lot of impact there that was really, really impressive to me. But again, we're going to wait till we fully publish the trial to get a lot of the data on that. They had some additional weight loss versus the 3 cycles crowd, but again, we'll wait to see. So
okay, sounds good. Now you mentioned the frequency of using it. So the recommendation is doing 3 cycles, and then after that quarterly. or depending on, I guess, if you want to lose more weight or I guess increase more of the health benefits, you could potentially do it more multiple months in a row outside the 3 months. Is that right?
Yeah, so we're not allowed to give personalized medical advice, so we can't prescribe people on what they should do. But we did see in the clinical trials, 3 months in a row leads to more impressive benefits than if you do it once, than what we know anecdotally from once a quarter. So for many people, the only thing I would caution you is if you're thinking about doing any type of prolonged fasting, check with your clinician, make sure you're healthy enough to do it. There are certain conditions that don't play nice with fasting. So we want to make sure that we keep everybody healthy. If you don't have any contraindications to doing it, as long as you have adequate body mass, doing this monthly appears to be something you're able to tolerate pretty well. Most people do very well with that. So we just want to make sure that you have adequate body mass and no health contraindication to doing this that regularly. So that would be my one statement about that. So,
and then what is the recommendation in between fasts?
So that's another thing. So one thing I love about our company, but it also makes it challenging for some of our customers, is that we're pretty tied to the data. If we have studies on it, we'll talk about it. If we don't, we tend to be pretty careful about it. And because we haven't done a combination of ProLon plus healthy eating, we're pretty careful about it. We do know that from all of the studies about all of the healthiest, longest living populations on Earth, that it appears that kind of ideal human diet is a modified Mediterranean diet that's fairly low in animal protein, fairly high in complex carbohydrates and fats. So it's called the longevity diet. Our founder, Dr. Valter Longo, wrote a whole book about it and about how you get there. So it's not it's based on real observational data, trial data, et cetera, showing that this is kind of the ideal diet. So for most people, you're going to want, in his recommendations, to do a 12-12 fast, meaning you at least a 12-hour overnight fast, finish eating at 8 p.m., don't start eating till 8 a.m., and you're going to want to eat primarily plant-based Mediterranean style. I think his ratio is 60-30-10, meaning 60% complex carbs, 30% fat, 10% protein. Some people are going to maybe need a little bit different ratio. As you get over 65, you may need a little bit more protein than that. But that seems to kind of be what looks like the ideal human diet based on all of the research for a long, healthy life. And then every now and then you're going to want to do several days of prolonged fasting, whether with ProLon or water fasting, whatever's safest for you and whatever's easiest. Every couple months, you're going to want to do that just to get that cellular cleanup and some of the metabolic benefits as well.
Okay. And then there's the L-Nutra also has the fast bars, which are I guess are they the exact same bars that you would get in the kit, or are they
a little
different?
bit scaled down? They're about 20% smaller. I think they have a little bit less sugar, but they are the almost identical ratio. And we've done clinical trials on those. And what the fast bar is designed to support, if you want to do, say, a 16-8 or an 18-6 fast, where you fast for 16 or 18 hours, but you're really hungry and you want to snack, this fast bar allows you to eat something and keep stay in the same physiologic shape. So basically stay in your fast. You aren't breaking your fast. We did the trials showing that we looked at water only versus the fast bar versus traditional breakfast after an overnight 15-hour fast. And what we showed was that the blood glucose levels in the water only group and the fast bar were identical. So even though we're giving you almost 6 grams of sugar, didn't budge your blood sugar, because it's got such a low glycemic index. We actually did the glycemic index and glycemic load studies showing how much sugar your body actually sees, and it's 25, which is extremely low glycemic index. So it's not going to kick you out of that fasting state. The ketone levels are almost identical over the 4 hours we tested after you eat the fast bar versus water, whereas breakfast was way different than both. So if you eat a traditional breakfast, it's going to break your fast. That's where the word break fast comes from. Breakfast, break fast. So we know the fast bar keeps you in that state. We know breakfast kicks you out of it. So if you want to have a coffee and a fast bar in the morning without breaking your fast, that's really what it's designed for. It can also be used as a snack throughout the day. It has a much more, in my opinion, healthy delivery of blood sugar. But yeah, it's got a couple different purposes, but the main one is to help you extend that fast while still getting to eat in the morning.
Okay. So I've done the ProLon fast multiple times. I've gone through. I think I've done 6 cycles over several years, and I really think the food tastes really good. I mean, I don't know if it's just because you're in a fasted state, so you're hungrier. But those bars, even when you're using them as a intermittent fasting supplement, I feel like that it still tastes great. The olives especially seem to be just extra tasty. I don't know. Can you talk about the olives? Are there anything special about those?
Yeah, so the olives are one of the more, so I hate olives normally. I'll be totally candid to everybody listening, but when I'm on the diet, I love them. They're great. So I really encourage people, if you don't like olives, to try them. Our olives in particular are pretty delicious. They're from one of the what's called blue zone regions in Spain, and they're carefully, there's such, some of these olives are so valuable that they're like literally taken from the field to the packaging facility by armed guard because people steal them. So they're very, very valuable. Blue zone olives. There's some evidence that there's something special about the Mediterranean blue zone olives that has maybe some extra benefit. They don't know exactly what it is, whether it's the tannins and phytonutrients in the olives or the olive oil itself. There's some great debate around what it is, but there appears to be something beneficial. A lot of the stuff we pick in the diet, we pick for very specific reasons. One of them is those olives. The combination of the fat and whatever else is in them appears to be very good for you. And the herbal teas we pick for their potential longevity benefits as well, because they're all sourced from the same diets that long living healthy people tend to eat. So there's a lot of so there's both the science of what we put in the box and the suspected benefits that are just from observation. So but the olives are one of those. They're definitely, to me, one of the they're one of the more expensive items in the box to get. So that's one of the reasons why it is what it costs, but they're also worth it.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely tell that the ingredients used are a higher quality than traditional packaged meals.
Yeah, we work pretty hard on that. And one of the reasons we don't, for anyone wondering why we don't call it organic, is because a lot of the stuff is sourced from regions that don't even use the term organic. Like Europe doesn't use it. So if you get an item from Europe, you just can't call it organic. So while many of the items in the box are organic, we can't certify it as an organic product. So don't, rest assured, we've done our best to make it as clean as possible. We're always refining it, but we think for the 5 days, this is about as good as you can get to give. We could make it a cleaner diet by giving you less net carbs, but it'd make it harder. So a lot of what we do is to make it, you don't need to go as low. You don't need to starve the body as much to get many of the benefits. So we've put together what we think is the optimum balance between taste, achievability, and results.
Right. Last question I had was, do you have any specific tips or tricks to maximize the experience going through the 5-day fast, or minimize any challenges during the fast?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the one thing I do want to tell everybody, if you haven't done this before, prolonged fasting is a challenge. You should be proud of yourself. You can do anything for 5 days, and we try to make it as easy as possible, but it can still be challenging. So some things that are very common during any type of fasting are headaches, fatigue, weakness. You can get difficulty concentrating in the middle while you're transitioning into a fasting state. And in some people, they may also feel cold, which is something that's normal as you go into a fasting state. Your heart rate and blood pressure can go down a little bit. So you're just getting less blood to your, I mean, you're still getting plenty of blood, but fingers can feel cold, toes can feel cold. So one, drink plenty of water. Two, if you are a coffee drinker, you're going to want to wean down ahead of time on your caffeine so you're not going through withdrawal. But we do allow 12 to 14 ounce, or 8 to 12 ounce cup of coffee, which is about 140 milligrams of caffeine. You could also have 2 cups of black or green tea or 6 cups of decaf. So if you're a caffeine drinker, wean down so you're not going through as much withdrawal on day 2, but definitely have your cup of coffee. It's going to make life easier. Stay active, but don't overexert yourself. We don't want people exercising super hard on the diet for both safety reasons and outcomes reasons. We want people to not create too much energy deficit by working out too hard. But we do want you to be active, brisk walking, gentle yoga, vigorous stretching. Those are all okay during the diet. They're going to help your body maintain its normal function. Get good rest. Most people sleep better on fasting, but not everybody. But that's okay, as long as you're laying down, getting good rest throughout the day. And then if you need it, you can use over-the-counter meds as directed. Generally, you should be just totally fine, unless they say don't take during fasting. So if you need Aleve or Tylenol or Advil, that's your prerogative. But on our diet itself, if you want to, you can have, as I mentioned, the caffeine. You can have up to 140 milligrams of caffeine. You can have, as long as there's no cream, no sweeteners. So you can drink any sparkling waters. Again, no cream, no sweetener, no artificial stuff. You can have any herbal tea you like. You can add a tablespoon of dried herbs and spices. We prefer red pepper flakes or something like that because they are very low in calories. Because even dried herbs have some calories, but if you want to change the flavor profile, you can. Most people think it's pretty tasty, but if you need that, you need that. You can have a tablespoon of salt, of Himalayan salt, as long as you don't have any contraindications to adding salt. Beyond that, we try to just say eat what's in the box and only what's in the box. Just add water, and you can eat the food each day in any order you want at any time you want. You just can't take one day into the next, and you should eat the days in the correct order.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and honestly, when you're talking about sleep, and you can eat the meal any way you want as long as you're eating what's in that specific day's box. I've saved the L bar for the end, and I'll eat it about an hour before bed, so that I actually have a little bit of food in my stomach, and then I won't feel hungry going to bed, and I'll sleep way better doing that. So that's just one thing I've noticed made a big difference.
That's a great point. One of the things I tell people, I try to push breakfast till later, like 10 or 11, and then I'll eat dinner at like 7:30 or 8 and go to bed pretty quickly afterwards, because I do have trouble falling asleep when I'm hungry. So people typically, if they do experience anything, it's usually on day 2 or 3. It goes away on its own within about 12 to 24 hours in almost every case. So if you are experiencing something, it usually gets better. But by day 3 to 4, people typically feel a little bit less hungry. Day 4 to 5 is really when they start to notice that increase in energy. So hopefully you guys will experience the same thing. I will also note, if you're somebody who doesn't eat a lot of fiber in your diet, our diet does have quite a bit of fiber, especially when you consider the calorie count. So we have about 18 grams of fiber per day, but we only have about 800 calories. So per bite, many Americans, it's going to be 3 to 6 times the fiber they normally get. So it's very normal for certain individuals. That's basically a party for your microbes in your gut. So your microbiome may produce a lot of gas. So bloating and gassiness are fairly common for people who don't eat a high fiber diet. So if you're thinking about doing this and you're worried about that, you may want to spend the first 1 to 2 weeks prior to the diet eating a more leafy greens, rooted vegetable rich diet to sort of help your gut prep a little bit, so that you're less likely to get that bloating and gassiness, because that can occur for certain individuals. Pretty rare, but it does happen. So.
And does it help to do a more keto diet a week prior to get into that, ketosis prior to going into a fast? Does that make a difference?
We haven't studied that. We do hear from people who are keto adapted, people who are more used to going into ketosis, that they tend to transition easier on day 2 or 3, or they transition a little bit earlier into a fasting state. We hear that. We haven't done the studies, so it's a little hard to say. But if that's your preference, sure. You may, if you're going into ketosis earlier, it may affect outcomes. I don't know what it'll do to the weight loss. You may burn a pound or 2 of visceral fat going into ketosis. So there's some questions there. But ultimately, if it makes you feel better and it works for you, we don't have any reason not to do it yet. We haven't really seen that. There is emerging evidence that people who are in chronic ketosis for a very long period of time, that may not be great for them unless it's medically necessary. So that's one thing we're paying close attention to what the research shows there. So.
Okay, perfect. It looks like that's all my questions and all the questions that have been posted. So I really appreciate your time. I do want to let everyone know that's attending right now. I am an affiliate with ProLon, and I have an exclusive offer for them. It's $99 off, so you get a box for $150, which is
Wow.
That's probably the best price I've seen since doing it 2 years ago. So I will post that link in into the Facebook comments, and then that deal is good until March 26th. So you got 3 days. Any final words or anything like that, Dr. Kelley?
I think it's really great to do this as a group. So if you can get somebody to do it with you, that's going to make your life easier. Day 2 and 3, and sign up for the health coaching, and make sure that you talk to Troy if you have any questions, concerns. We can't give personalized medical advice, but we can talk to you about generalized issues. So if you do have any questions, let us know. We'll help as best we can. But it's always easier with a group. So I think that's one key that I see people have a lot more success. They get to talk it through if they're having trouble. Most people do great. But if you are somebody who's struggling, it's nice to see other people and have some encouragement, and also to see some success stories. And I think it's just a much better experience if you do it in a group. So I really encourage people, if you're all thinking about doing it, maybe try and coordinate starting at a similar time so that you can go through it together.
Yeah, that's actually what I was thinking. In a couple of my groups have expressed interest in already, so I think we might do like a group fast together. So just like you said, have that community accountability, and also just collaboration with them. So, well, thanks again. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much for your time and answering all our questions. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. This is great, and I'm looking forward to helping out any way I can. So it's great to see you again, Troy.
Same here. Take care. Have a good one.
Thank you, sir. Bye.